And Leslie, let us know when we get a quorum, if you keep an eye on the members.
So we need 16?
There's 27 of them, we need half of that plus one, so.
Okay, I see the screen, so I will choose okay after I give my warning to the people who may be in the main channel.
Excellent.
Wendy, oh, here we go. Wendy, you should see a prompt to promote you as a panelist.
There we go. And it's, oh, go ahead, Edgar. I was just gonna say it's 5:31. So, you know, just in order to make the best use of our time, I think we should get started. It looks like we've got clearly a quorum. We have a really exciting panel here, and to be respectful of their time, we're gonna save all our usual announcements and updates and housekeeping for the end of the meeting. And so I'll turn it over in a moment to Kate and Michael to moderate, but first Roberto will just say a few words about the translation, or the interpretation, excuse me.
Shall I go ahead?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, si hay alguien que desea ofrecer comentarios o participar escuchando todos los procedimientos en español, aquí estoy para interpretarle. Por favor, háganos saber levantando la manito. El raise hand es un icono que está en la pantalla abajo. Si quiere escuchar todo en español solamente, hay otro icono que es como un globito que dice Interpretations. Y ahí se puede elegir el canal de español. Una vez que esté adentro, solamente me va a escuchar a mí. Pero si quiere hacer un comentario en cualquier momento, por favor, utilice el icono de manito levantada, que se llama Raise Hand, que está abajo en la barra inferior. En ese momento se le reconocerá por nombre y se le desbloqueará su micrófono para que hable. Si es que se ha unido a esta reunión por teléfono, tiene que apretar *9 en el teclado de su teléfono para el mismo efecto. Para bajar la manito cuando esté usando su teléfono, vuelve a apretar *9. Y si tiene cualquier pregunta en cualquier momento durante la reunión, no olvide que puede siempre levantar la manito. Gracias.
Yes, and thank you, Roberto. All right, and thanks to our panelists for joining us, and for everyone for switching to virtual during this time of COVID surge, and I'm glad we can all be together. And now I will turn it over to Kate and Michael to facilitate the meeting.
Okay, good evening, everybody. We've got a very full agenda ahead of us. I would like to invite Leslie to do roll call. I believe that needs to happen next.
Closer and louder.
Solange Altman?
I don't see her.
Aaron Anguiano?
I saw him.
Present. Here.
Leah Ashford?
Here.
Josh Bridegroom?
Nope.
Wendy Bird?
Here.
Trish Christensen?
Here.
Darius Crosby? Jeff Dirksey?
No.
Birgit Flatiger?
Here.
Teresa Gamboa?
Here.
Adriana or Johnny Garcia?
Here.
Thank you. Jonathan Grammatico? Austin Grant?
Present.
Brad Hahn?
Here.
Thomas Helm?
I see him. He's here.
Okay. Jennifer Jennison?
Here.
Ruben Imperial?
No.
Will Kelly?
Here.
Marion Martino?
Here.
Matthew Mason,
No.
Linda Mayo,
Here.
Perfecto Munoz,
No.
Maria Perez,
No.
Nico Solorio,
Here.
Dan Starr,
Present.
Aaron Tate,
Present.
Tim Zierli.
No.
Thank you.
Quorum?
Thanks, Leslie. We okay to keep going?
Yes.
All
Yes,
right.
we have a
Thank you, City of Modesto. Edgar, can I have you share the slideshow just so I can offer a little context to folks before we dive in?
Hey, and sorry I had to get up for a second, but I'm here.
We knew you were here, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank
Okay, so just want to offer some beginning context before we dive into the bulk of our meeting, which is a panel presentation. One thing, because we're in a virtual space, a couple things I'd ask as favors. If you're not speaking and you could mute yourself, that would be great and help with a lot of the background noise. And also, I'll say this a number of times, but we have the Q&A function for our attendees. That Q&A function will be open the entire meeting. And we're using that as a way to track questions and comments as they arise. But we'll invite our panelists to know that it's there, know that Michael and I are tracking it. We're not going to answer those questions or respond to those comments in real time, but it's important information for us to have. In addition to the Q&A function for our audience, there will be a public comment period at the end of this meeting, which we've moved there on purpose so that you have a chance to ask questions or respond to anything that you might hear during our panel presentation today. So that's where we're headed. We'll have a break after we hear from our panelists, who I'll introduce in just a second. And then we'll have room for our work group to ask questions. And then we'll have a public comment period, give some updates, and get us out of here at or before 8 o'clock. Go ahead, Edgar. I want to just remind folks, as we always do, of the group agreements that you all committed to at the beginning of this process. And in addition to, reminding us of these various bullet points about how we might work together, I think Mike and I would also like to remind people that this is a really dense topic, as has been all of our discussions. And so if we find ourselves getting stuck on any one particular issue or question, we're going to put that in what we've been calling our parking lot and make sure that it gets to our ad hoc group. So we just want to make sure we hear as many voices as possible. I also really want to highlight that step up, step back commitment for tonight's meeting. It's hard to be in a virtual space and really know who wants to speak and who is having a hard time coming into the virtual room. So just inviting folks to be very, very aware of how much space they're taking up and how much space they're creating for other people to ask questions. And keep going. Maybe, there we go. Okay. Okay, Edgar, you can go ahead and stop sharing so we can actually look at each other. I want to remind folks that we are in our second of 2 meetings where we're exploring accountability and what accountability looks like when we're thinking about police conduct decisions and how they impact the city of Modesto and its members. Last time we were together, we had a presentation from Modesto Police Department to help further illustrate what the current practice is, how they're making decisions, how they're currently thinking about accountability. And as promised, we're using this session to bring to you just some additional information about models that exist. So I want to make something very clear and explicit, and we'll probably say this more than once. Nobody's advocating for anything in this presentation. I'm very grateful to those who arranged for our 4 very well-respected panelists to join us tonight who bring a perspective. And they're not the only perspectives, but they are perspectives that are important for us to learn more about. And the ad hoc groups who are tasked with doing much more of the detailed work will have lots of opportunities to ask more questions, bring in additional speakers, pursue lines of inquiry even further. So we've asked our speakers to join us today by way of just providing you with more information and perspectives for us to think about as we're exploring whether or not the City of Modesto and Modesto Police Department have the kind of accountability structures in place that hold folks accountable for conduct decisions and how it affects our community. Okay, so I'm going to say just a few more words. Very excited to welcome our panelists. I'm going to introduce you all briefly, both because I got information from the bios you provided, and I also did a little lightweight stalking on LinkedIn. So I'll share a little bit of information. In the order that I introduce you is the order that we'll invite you to answer questions. So know, Jerry, that when I introduce you first, Mr. Threet will be the person who will be speaking first as well. So just thought I'd give you an early warning. I also would like to remind our audience that, as I said, you have the Q&A function available to you if you'd like to put questions into that Q&A. We will track it. If we have time, we'll ask them later, and there will be the public comment period. So there are ways for you to engage. And the panelists, both our speakers and our work group members, you don't need to monitor that or respond to things. Mike and I will be tracking all that information. For our work group members, please listen from a place of learning about these particular perspectives, and I'd invite you to track any questions that arise for you. As I had said, after a break, you'll have a time to just do a Q&A. We'll have a back and forth. You can ask questions as they have come up for you, but also any questions that you have will be important for our ad hoc group to have as well. So just inviting you to listen from a place of curiosity and learning. So for our panelists, we asked them to address a set of questions. The first was just to describe their particular program or strategy, give us a little history and information about where it all started, what the impetus was for the creation of whatever their review framework is. We wanted them to talk a little bit to how the community is connected to this process, what's working well and what could be working better, and then any advice they might offer this group as they're thinking or considering the question of whether or not some sort of framework, oversight, or review framework is wanting. So tonight we have with us Mr. Jerry Threet, who was the first and now former director of Sonoma County's Independent Office of Law Enforcement Review and Outreach. He is a very, very experienced attorney, long history of working in the areas of civilian oversight of law enforcement, legislative bodies, public meeting bodies, public law, consumer protection, litigation. We're very excited to have Mr. Threet here. We'll be inviting him to start us off in just a second. We also have Dr. LaTesha Watson. She's the director for the Office of Public Safety and Accountability in the city of Sacramento. She is a very, very well-known 27-year municipal law enforcement veteran. She's held sworn and non-sworn positions, including the position of police chief. And she does a lot of work in executive and police leadership, and has a lot of experience in police oversight. We also have Frank Hauptmann, who is an independent consultant, and he joins us from the city of Riverside, where they have a community police review commission. His experience is, it spans over 4 decades. He's been active in law enforcement, has had every rank from police officer to police chief, and has developed an expertise in the area of internal affairs investigations, and has been teaching the subject in advanced officer training programs at Cal State Long Beach, among many, many other things. And then finally, we have Rick Armanderas, who's the deputy police chief with the city of Anaheim. You may recognize him or know him because his previous post was with the Modesto Police Department, where he started, I think, at the age of 23, is what I read, and also held a variety of positions from police officer to assistant police chief, and also served as an interim deputy city manager for the city of Modesto. So we invited him to join us today to offer his perspective as a deputy police chief in the city of Anaheim, who's been working with a police review board since 2007. So that's who we have with us. We've asked them to come and speak to us, all of them, for about 15 minutes. Panelists, I'm just going to let you know that I'm very gently and politely going to interrupt if I feel like we're butting up against that 15-minute mark. And if there are no questions or concerns, then I'm going to pin your videos so that we might see your faces and invite Mr. Threet to start us off. one more. Dr. Watson. Okay. Mr. Threet, I invite you to unmute yourself. Tell us all the things.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you. I've got a lot of slides and just I'm going to go through them quickly, but I included more just in case folks wanted to look at them in more detail on their own later. So if we could advance to the first one. Yeah, next slide, please. I'm currently working in a different position with the city of Richmond in a review commission setting, but I decided to present on this because it's the agency that I founded and know the most about, and it has its unique history that I think is interesting and you can learn something from. So there's a long history of calls for civilian oversight in Sonoma County that started back in the 1990s after a number of troubling shootings, and the Civil Rights Commission, the U.S. Civil Rights Commission came to Sonoma County and did investigations and recommended civilian oversight in 2000. It was only in 2013 that we actually came to seriously considering the implementation of civilian oversight after the shooting of 13-year-old Andy Lopez by a deputy sheriff in a low-income outside of Santa Rosa, to a great deal of unrest in the county. The county appointed a task to look at the issues, shooting and other issues related to it. The task force, after meeting 15 months weekly, the task force came up with a set of recommendations, the most of which was to create this new civilian oversight office for the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, which is called the Independent Office of Law Enforcement Review and Outreach. And we
looks like we may have lost him.
Yep, looks like we have.
did I come back?
Oh, here you are.
There
Okay.
you go.
So we are having a little bit of trouble with your audio. Maybe your internet connection may not be supporting.
It shows strong on my side.
Okay.
But so that the IOLERO office was established by the board in 2015, and it opened in March of 2016 when I took office. Can we advance the slide, please? So essentially what we have with IOLERO when it opened was an auditor or review model of oversight. One of the primary missions of the office was to audit investigations of significant allegations of misconduct. Those were not defined when it was established, but were negotiated with the sheriff's office, and those included use of force, bias in policing or in the jail, and constitutional violations that were alleged by complainants. Can we advance the slide, please? There were several other missions that were called out by the task force that suggested this be established. One was really robust outreach to Sonoma County communities, particularly communities with a history of distrust with the sheriff's office, for IOLERO to propose thoughtful policy recommendations to the sheriff's office, particularly ones that would better align with the desires of the community, and overall to enhance and strengthen relationships between the community and the sheriff's office. Next slide, please. So the office has gone through several transitions, and a very significant one in 2020. Over 3 years of operation with the office pointed out some significant challenges that were in place with the way it was set up. So what we have here is the criteria for effective oversight that have been put out by the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. And these are useful criteria to look at proposals or existing models of oversight and evaluate them for whether they would meet the needs of oversight. So one of those is independence. And under the IOLERO model as originally established, the director served at the pleasure of the Board of Supervisors and could be dismissed for any reason or no reason at all at any time. There's also criteria for effective oversight that calls for an adequate budget and staff. IOLERO was provided with some pretty robust missions, but was open with 2 employees, which included the director and an administrative assistant. In contrast, the sheriff's office had 625 sworn employees that were subject to the misconduct investigations and audits. IOLERO had a budget of $650,000 and the sheriff was 1.7 million at that time. Access to information was discretionary with the sheriff and didn't always come from a request. I can go to the next slide, please. Other criteria for effective oversight. You need adequate legal authority, so everyone's on the same page about what the oversight office can do and what it's authorized to do. And as originally established, IOLERO had the ordinance restricted its authority in many ways that made it difficult to do some of the work. Although the ordinance gave IOLERO the ability to review and suggest changes to policy, there was ongoing conflict with the sheriff about what the scope of that authority was. And that led to, those differences sometimes led to public conflicts, which made the relationship more challenging. Effective community engagement is necessary for effective oversight. And the office, because it lacked adequate staff and funding, it was really difficult and challenging to get out and talk to folks in the community, particularly communities that were traditionally underserved and had distrust of government authority. So you really have to get out and go to community meetings where people are already meeting. You can't expect them to come to your meetings with that kind of relationship. And then really you need very robust transparency. If the public's going to trust that this agency truly has their interest at heart and is doing effective oversight, then you have to be transparent about what you're doing. And that means public reporting on a regular basis. And under the IOLERO model as originally established, the sheriff repeatedly disputed the authority of the agency to publish reports during the year. So can we go to the next slide, please? So because of these challenges and because of dissatisfaction in the public for the way IOLERO was operating, after I retired from the office and after there was some discussion with the Board of Supervisors, the county board, about possible reform of the ordinance, the board passed on that. And so the public decided to start collecting signatures to put a measure on the ballot. I worked with various community members and different community groups to come up with a proposal. And we began collecting signatures. And that's when COVID hit, and that stopped everything. You couldn't go door to door collecting signatures during a pandemic. And then came in the May of that year, the Black Lives Matter protests that rose up in response to George Floyd's murder. And then the board had renewed interest in this subject. So that summer, the board actually put this measure on the ballot, and it passed with a 2/3 vote of the electorate countywide, in some places at 80% and 85% in certain cities. So now we have some reforms. The model is a little bit different now for IOLERO, and I wanted to point out some of those differences. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the new things under the model, as it's been amended by ballot measures, that now for certain critical incidents, officer-involved shootings, for example, or deaths in custody in the jail, there is the power for the IOLERO director to conduct independent investigations of those incidents. The director consequently also has subpoena power to be able to gather all the evidence that she needs to conduct those investigations. There's now clarity that the IOLERO has the authority to conduct systemic audits of policies, practices, and training. The ordinance mandates cooperation from the sheriff rather than leaving it discretionary and voluntary on his behalf. And it very specifically says that the IOLERO director should have unfettered access to all information, records, and staff of the sheriff's office in order to conduct the business of IOLERO. And then very importantly, it set a budget benchmark so that in each annual budget, IOLERO gets a minimum amount of 1% of the sheriff's total budget. There's also another provision that says that that amount should be evaluated periodically to make sure that it's adequate. Next slide, please. And then there are other more specific things. It calls for an annual analysis of racial bias, potential racial bias, and stops by deputies on the patrol side of the office. It calls for a review of the merit of all civil lawsuits filed against the sheriff's office. It allows the director to recommend discipline for deputies found to have committed misconduct. It allows the director to review all body-worn camera for use of force at any time at the director's discretion, and the director has the authority to publish any body-worn camera footage that she deems in the public interest. And then the director gets a 3-year appointment and can only be removed for cause by 4/5 vote of the Board of Supervisors. Next slide, please. I think I covered this. So as I said, the measure passed, and because of the way it was put on the ballot and advanced to the voters, it happened at the last minute at a Board of Supervisors meeting, and there was not, unfortunately, an opportunity for a meet and confer process with the unions representing deputies and supervisors in the sheriff's office. 2 of those unions filed a challenge in a state agency called the Public Employee Relations Board, and that board ruled that many of the provisions of the ordinance passed by the voters cannot be implemented because there was not an appropriate meet and confer process. The county has challenged that ruling on several grounds, and it's now in the appellate courts. But in the meantime, many of the provisions of the new ordinance are on stay until the resolution of these issues. Can we go to the next slide, please? See. Yeah, I think I've covered these issues. Next slide. So that's a brief presentation, and I just wanted to say I'm happy to answer any questions about a community review board process, because I've got a good amount of experience with that in the city of Richmond, California. And each community has, their unique permutations of these boards, but I'd be happy to answer questions on that also. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Threet. And I just want to lift up that you did an outstanding job of also staying within the 15-minute window, which is appreciated. We'll have opportunities for questions from our work group and attendees in just a bit, but I'd like to go ahead and invite Dr. Watson to take us to our next presentation.
Okay, it's Hauptmann that's next. City of Riverside that's next.
We can adjust if that's all right with you, Dr. Watson. It looks like in the PowerPoint, we do have the City of Riverside next, so apologies for that confusion. And Frank, Mr. Hauptmann, if you don't feel completely ambushed, we'd like to invite you to go next.
Okay, no problem. Are you able to see the video at all? And
we're all seeing the PowerPoint, but we don't see your video.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I do represent the city of Riverside. City of Riverside has a population of nearly 330,000 and a police department of about 440 sworn. And the city itself is approximately 82 square miles. So as far as the Community Police Review Commission is concerned, it is one of 15, if you can go to the next slide, please. It's one of 15 city boards and commissions. It was established on April 11th of 2000. And at that time, it was added to the Riverside Municipal Code under Chapter 2.76. And interestingly enough, later it was added to the city charter under Section 810 of the Riverside City Charter. Next slide, please. So what caused this to come to fruition? Riverside, it's kind of similar to what we just heard from the County of Modesto, or I believe it was the County of Modesto. And yeah, you have, there were a variety of different shootings that had occurred that were alarming to community members, various situations where there was questionable use of force. And the catalyst that really generated all this is an incident that occurred on December 28th of 1998 with LaTesha Miller, a 19-year-old African-American woman that was shot and killed by 4 Riverside police officers when she reached for the gun in her lap. Now, the officers were called there because it appeared she was in distress. Family members tried to alert her. She had, was frothing at the mouth. It appeared that there could be a medical emergency. They don't know, but she did have a gun in her lap. And eventually they broke the window because they wanted to get to her. And what happens then is she grabs the gun, and at that point, an officer-involved shooting takes place. In the aftermath of that, there was civil unrest that had taken place, and also the State Attorney General's office was called in to take a look at the agency itself for civil rights violations and actions. And then it started to come to the point where community felt that there has to be some kind of civilian oversight because of the various events, and they kind of felt that there was a lack of control and accountability at the police department. So very similar to what you're doing, the community stakeholders came together along with government officials, folks from the universities, also from the police association, police department, coming to find a way in which they could establish some kind of civilian oversight. Now, a lot of research was done at that time looking at models throughout the country. And one of the models that they seem to feel kind of fit, because in looking at civilian oversight, you certainly want it to fit to the community itself. And the city of Long Beach had one that they felt came closest to what it is that they were looking for. And there were adjustments made and things of that nature, but then these groups all came together, and this took quite some time. So eventually it was decided that they would have, City of Riverside is divided into 7 wards, and they wanted to have a representative from each ward and then 2 at large. You wanted an odd number of panel members, so they established 9. You can go to the next slide, please. Here's some of the headlines that were coming out at the time in the local newspaper. But the one that was really targeted by community activists was subpoena power. And the subpoena power actually is something that came to fruition. It is actually part of the city charter and in the municipal code. Next slide, please. So on April 11th, 2000 is where the council unanimously approved the city ordinance, and therefore the Community Police Review Commission then began. Next slide, please. So, as I said, it started there in 2000, but then again, members of the community felt that there wasn't the strong support from the council that they were looking for. And they felt that it was the kind of commission that if it was creating too much of an issue or a problem, that you could change the ordinance or just get rid of it. So community members, they went out there and got a lot of signatures and had it put on a ballot measure number 2, and it won by a 60% of the vote and then became part of the city charter. Next slide, please. So they had to decide what is the overall mission. It was to promote the public confidence, the professionalism, and accountability of the sworn staff of the Riverside Police Department. Next slide. So the commission's purpose, and this was established through the ordinance itself, is to promote effective, efficient, trustworthy, and just law enforcement in the city of Riverside, bring findings and recommendations regarding law enforcement policies and practices to the attention of the city, to ensure good relations between those who enforce the laws and the diverse populace in whom they serve. Next slide, please. So there are 4 components of the police commission, and whenever anytime anyone asks me, I always divide it up this way, because people ask, well, what do? They review all citizen complaints filed against a sworn member of the police department, and only cases filed within 6 months of the date of the incident are reviewed by the commission. They do not investigate any internally generated. These are only based on citizen complaints. Secondly, they review and investigate the death of any individual arising out of or in connection with the actions of a police officer. The third component, and it was an important one that was put into the charter and to the municipal code itself, is to conduct public outreach and educate the community as to the role and responsibilities of the police commission. Each one of the commissioners was charged with in doing this public outreach. And they have done a tremendous job over the years. And with the advent of different technologies and everything, of course, they had to grow with that too. So that's working out pretty well. The other component is training, and training in the area of the department policy manual, understanding it, how to look and understand allegations that are made and how they fit into allegations where there could be alleged misconduct. So they are provided, I could go on and on with that, it'd take too long, but they're provided with training on how to conduct these reviews, case law, how to apply findings to alleged misconduct. And also I provide them with ongoing training in regards to like being able to participate in with a monitor on a shoot, don't shoot situation. So they understand some of the stresses that take place with the split-second decision-making that some officers have to make. And it's really opened up the eyes on how quickly things transpire. But I will tell you this, that the one thing that truly really made a difference to them is when, first of all, they started with having audio. The officers had to record all of their contacts. And then they eventually went to the body-worn camera. And the body-worn camera is a significant tool now in looking at these events that occur. And the one interesting thing I found is I had some of the commissioners, they were saying, well, gosh, people lie. This is amazing what we see here. And the other part is, well, this is supposed to be the truth finder, whether it's on the law enforcement side or on the other side. But it was an eye-opener for them to see how things actually take place in the streets. Next slide, please. So by ordinance, there are duties and powers to advise the mayor and the city council on all community relations issue, conduct the public outreach, like I said, and receive complaints of misconduct. Now, with the way this works with the complaint process, a citizen complaint is made either through the commission or it is made at the police department. The copies are provided to the commission, and also the PD has theirs. And then the investigations are conducted by the Internal Affairs Division of the police department. And one of the things that was added into the actual policy for conducting these investigations, they had to be completed within 4 months. And if not, the department was required to send a letter to the complainant giving an explanation as to why it was going to take longer. Once the investigation has been completed, a captain in the department makes a recommendation on a finding, whether sustained, not sustained, exonerated, or unfounded, and there's a few others. And then it gets sent to me and with the commission. And there's a system that's used that many of you are probably familiar with, Laserfish. And with my background and expertise, I read and I go through these cases from cover to cover. And then I provide a synopsis. There are times where I'll send it back to the department for some clarifications or things that might be confusing to commissioners. The department is very good about that, actually. And once it's completed, then I do a synopsis version of the entire case. The commission then gets the cases before their meetings. They usually have 3 to 4 weeks to do this. And in that time period, they have the Laserfish access. There's issued city laptops, and they get everything. There's nothing that's kept away from them, with the exception of the memorandum of finding by the captain. And that is so that there's no undue influence on behalf of the police department to the commissioners. They meet, they discuss, they deliberate, they look at each one of the allegations, and then they make a recommendation for a finding. And they have to have at least a majority vote in coming up with a finding. And once that's completed, or during that meeting, of course, I present the cases. Do you have a police chief or a deputy chief or a captain that also participates? But I mean, as a silent party, they are there to answer policy questions or any other questions in regard to the department. And also, once they have the discussions, these discussions are things between the commissioners, is what the police chief wants to hear, because the final determination on a finding is not made until the commission has provided their input. And then the final decision is made by the chief of police. Now, if the finding, if there are findings that are kind of looking too much, that they're too favorable in the department, the city manager then takes a look at these cases and the whys and the wherefores and things of that nature. And this might be kind of interesting for you to know. About 95% of the findings are the same as the police department's findings. It's very interesting. And I say this because I do believe that the Riverside's Internal Affairs Bureau has exceptional investigators that are very thorough, unbiased in everything that they do. So that's one thing I can say. I think that's what kind of results this way. The place where you'll find maybe a conflict is usually the difference between what is unfounded and what is unfounded, or what would be exonerated. And there's a very fine line on what would be unfounded or exonerated, but typically we understand unfounded means it did not occur. Exonerated means, well, the actions occurred, but they were within policy, such as force being used. Someone says it was excessive force. Well, if the force that was used was necessary and it was within policy, well, the force was used, but it was within policy. So that would be exonerated, not unfounded. Next slide, please.
Mr. Hauptmann, just wanted to let you know we have about 3 more minutes left.
Wrap it up. Okay, next slide. I think this kind of speaks for itself here with the investigation of the officer-involved death situations. One thing that I think you might find interesting is that the Riverside Police Department has put officer-involved shooting investigations, the criminal investigations, online. They've been doing that for about 15 years. And they absolutely put everything online, and that for the exception of those things in the legal matter, such as medical, or the autopsy photo, the things you wouldn't find necessary to be put in there. But it is open for the public to review. And that's what the commission uses as they go through the review process. The commission has access, and we have a contractor who is a homicide expert out of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, retired. He's provided his expertise all across the country, and he reads these and goes through these cases from cover to cover. And he allows the commission to know whether he feels it's within best practices and his opinion of the investigation itself. He does go out to the scene after the event has occurred. Him and I attend the command staff briefing. There's nothing kept away from us to provide to the commissioners later. And then, of course, they get that case where they come up with a public report at the very end. Next slide now. Next slide again. Okay, well, this just goes through on officer-involved death cases. It's either within policy or not within policy. That's what they come up with. And there's a variety of different findings that they will provide to these cases that they have access to. And is there one more slide? Never mind. So I guess in a quick nutshell, I try to convey everything that has been going on with the city of Riverside. It's been working very well. There were some adjustments that were made. One of the things that never really worked well was the subpoena power if you wanted an officer to come in, because they would appear on the subpoena, but their attorneys would say, we're not going to talk. We're not going to provide a statement, which they didn't have to. They found that other things that you can seize through the subpoena power works well, but that one did not work so well. So, but all in all, you have a professional group of individuals that are on this commission. They're very objective in the way they look at things. The changes have been phenomenal from the beginning when there was controversy between police association and the commission to now where there is a much better understanding and there's a more of a trust factor that's been put in place because of the fact of how objective they are in the way in which you do it. The council's done a tremendous job with their appointments. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hauptmann, that was helpful. I wanted to just take a minute before I invite Dr. Watson to help us continue with our learning, to let people know that, like always, we'll make sure this PowerPoint is available on the website for Forward Together, so everyone will have access to all of this information and whatever else we generate. Dr. Watson, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. LaTesha Watson. I am currently the Director of the Office of Public Safety Accountability, also termed OPSA, is what they call us for short. And you can go to the next slide. So the Office of Public Safety Accountability includes oversight over the Sacramento Police Department, as well as the Sacramento's Fire Department. The overall goals and objectives of the office is creating meaningful opportunities for the Sacramento community to influence decisions that impact them. Also incorporate some innovative and progressive ideas to resolve any issues that arise, and also explain challenges and limitations that's associated with some of the issues, and ensure some outcomes and some of their actual ideas come to fruition while making sure that we're inclusive and accessible. You can go to the next slide. Now, there's a lot of duties up here for the Office of Public Safety Accountability, and we will not go through each one of those. But just as a background, there were a lot of concerns in 1998 from the Blue Ribbon Citizens Committee, and that committee was appointed by the city manager at that time. They had concerns with the Sacramento Police Department. The committee had recommended a lot of changes in processing and an investigation of community complaints involving police misconduct. And there you have birthed the Office of Police Accountability. And that was in 1999. In 2004, we began to receive our new name, where we were birthed the Office of Public Safety Accountability, because we received oversight of the fire department due to a few scandals that occurred at that time. You can go to the next slide. Now, oversight is quite different in the city of Sacramento. What they did was they established the Office of Public Safety Accountability, but then they also, under several different iterations, established the Sacramento Community Police Review Commission as well. So two different forms of oversight because of community concerns involving the Sacramento Police Department as well as the Sacramento Fire Department. After the actual expansion, the main goal was to increase transparency and accountability with the police department as well as the fire department. And the authority became very broad here in the city of Sacramento for the Office of Public Safety Accountability. And one of the things to note is that due to all of the unrest throughout this country, July 1st of 2020, now Mayor Darrell Steinberg created the Inspector General position. There's a lot of mistrust between the Sacramento Police Department and its community. The Inspector General position is a position that I developed and hired for OPSA. And we do have a person from Chicago that is our first Inspector General. And he has full independence and authority to concurrently investigate officer-involved shootings and use of force incidents resulting out of serious bodily injury or death due to SB 1421. And you can go to the next slide. This just gives more background in reference to the purpose of the other body, which is the Sacramento Community Police Review Commission. They are advisory only in nature. It is an 11-member group. They are volunteers and citizens residing in the different districts in the city of Sacramento, and they are appointed by each council member, which is 8 seats. And then you have 3 other seats that are appointed by the mayor. Their main goal is to look at policies, programs, procedures of the police department and provide recommendations to mayor and council as far as what they see from their research and their ad hoc committee meetings that they desire should be changed or should be improved in some manner. And you can go to the next slide. This just spells out some more things in reference to what OPSA does. It also provides some very detailed information in reference to the investigative portions of OPSA and also OPSA serving as a community liaison to the Sacramento Police Community Review Commission. And you can go to the next slide. One of the main issues that we have with the community involving OPSA as well as the police commission is they believe or there's confusion that OPSA is a part of the police department. So a lot of our engagement and our educational efforts in the city of Sacramento is to make sure we provide clear indication that we are separate, a third-party entity outside of the police department. We provide checks and balances to what it is that the police department and the fire department does. The Office of Public Safety Accountability, the group as well as myself as the director, we report directly to the mayor and city council. The fire chief and the police chief, they report to the city manager. Myself and the city manager are peers here in the city of Sacramento. So to ensure that it's understood that we're an independent office, we provide additional educational information to our complainants who call in or anyone who desires to understand how checks and balances is provided in Sacramento by sharing our organizational structure and the manner in which we handle issues that are brought up by either one of our public safety agencies. And you can go to the next slide. There's a multitude of ways that complaints or allegations against public safety employees can be filed. They can be filed directly with my staff in the Office of Public Safety Accountability. They can be emailed to my staff as well by telephone. There are different areas on our website that you can anonymously provide allegations or shed light on concerns or interactions that you've had with public safety employees. And of course, complainants can also contact Internal Affairs with the Sacramento Police Department, as well as professional standards in the fire department. And you can go to the next slide. This just briefly spells out what occurs when someone files a complaint or an allegation of misconduct against public safety personnel. At this particular time, my staff does the review of the completed investigation, and that means looking at the entire case file involving any body-worn camera footage, any dash cam footage, any narratives, any witness statements. Everything that's involved in that case packet is reviewed to ensure that the investigation was conducted free from bias and that it was thoroughly conducted to its end. And basically, everything, every rock turned over, and to ensure that the conclusion or the disposition of the case is as it should be. Once that is done, we provide information as to whether we agree or we disagree with the findings. There are very few times that we have disagreed since I've been here, which is approaching a year and 9 months. But the few times that we have found to be correct, of course, in that aspect, and changes have to be made in regards to how that investigation was conducted or the disposition associated with that case. And you can go to the next slide. The review side of OPSA responds to critical incident response, and they ensure they are provided a walkthrough. They have access to the entire scene, to the interviews, to everything that is provided when you talk about a serious investigation involving the death of a community member. But with the Inspector General being added to my office as well, a concurrent investigation independent of the police department is done. So there is additional authority that is provided under those guidelines of the Senate Bill 1421. So we have basically a review side of the office, and then we also have an investigation side of the office. Next slide. And I tried to make sure I didn't give you all too much information, but just enough to understand the dual side of what OPSA does involving the police and fire, because very, very different entities, although both of them are considered public safety.
Thank you so much, Dr. Watson. I'm sure people have plenty of questions, which we'll be able to get to in just a few. Before we take a quick break, I'm going to invite Assistant Chief, or Deputy Chief, excuse me, Rick Armanderas to close us out for these brief presentations with his perspective.
Okay. Well, good evening. First of all, Kate, can you hear me? Okay, great. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak and present, and thank you for everyone that's volunteering your time to be a part of this. I know it's an important topic for the community, one that I still, even though I'm in Southern California, still hold dear to my heart, have family and friends that still reside in Modesto. So something that's important, and I completely understand that. So just a little bit about Anaheim. Population is about 360,000. We have 50 square miles, home to 25,000 businesses, to include Major League Baseball, Major League Hockey, one of the largest convention centers west of the Mississippi, and of course, a little place called Disneyland. We average about 25 million visitors a year from all throughout the world. And it's a very diverse community. So very unique kind of policing that we have to do here, all done with only 400 officers. So for the amount of work that's being done, it's quite substantial. So we can get started with the presentation, and I'm just going to obviously give you a different perspective because you heard from the auditors that and how they operate and the roles and responsibilities. And my presentation is going to talk about an agency and how we work. So next slide. We really wanted to have a foundation as far as kind of what we believe in as an organization. And just like my experience in Modesto, we understand that effective policing requires trust and partnerships with the community, something that's collaborative, and transparency plays a critical role in that. Next slide, please. So how we do it here in Anaheim is through different avenues. One's the Police Review Board, which we'll be talking about. The second is Office of Independent Review, which I'll be talking about. We also have something called a Major Incident Review Team, which I will briefly talk about, and Chiefs Advisory Board as well. The additional things are just things just to be aware of, but we also have a data release unit that covers AB 748 and SB 1421. And then a couple other things that we do regularly or in the process of, such as CALIA, bringing in subject matter experts, again, for the auditing and inspection, always looking at best practices. Next slide, please. So OIR is Office of Independent Review. It's a organization based in LA County. The two attorneys, the main attorneys, there's several that they have, but the two is Mike Janocco and Stephen Conley. Both are well-known and subject matter experts, recognized not only in the state, but in California, but as a nation as well. They do a lot of oversight and reviews on critical incidents. So we have contracted with them. We started off our contract with them back in 2007. And it really, for the contract that the city has with OIR Group, it was something that actually was not generated because of some controversy that occurred, but it was more of at the time, Chief Walters wanting to continue to improve the organization. So there was a contract. It has been modified throughout the years, but what they do now is they're basically our independent auditor, serves as a police practices advisor for the city and the police review board, which I'll be talking about here next. They respond to the scenes of officer-involved shootings and or in custody deaths the night of, and will monitor, review the investigation, and be with our internal affairs and our major incident response team, which again, I'll talk about here in a second. They attend the major incident response, the MERT presentations. They review all lethal force and in custody deaths, our officer involved shootings and in custody deaths. They review bias-based policing complaints. They also review all administrative investigations for sergeants and above. And they also review all of the serious administrative cases and a large portion of our minor administrative investigations as well. They provide an annual report, and the slide to the far right shows an example of the most recent one, where they, based on their investigation and review, provide recommendations as far as what they believe are areas of concern, areas of improvement. But just as an example, I just wanted to show the fact that that's an annual report that comes out and it is published to the public. And they attend all police review board meetings and act as advisors for the police review board. Next slide, please. Our police review board was founded in 2014. Now the board was as a result of a controversial shooting that happened back in 2012. There was several incidents that occurred, and there actually was protests that resulted as a result of those controversial shootings. As a result of that, there was a creation of what started off as a public safety board, which included police and fire, has then since transformed into just a police review board back in 2018. The board is an oversight board made up of Anaheim residents who advise and make policy recommendations to the city manager. So the board reports directly to the city manager. What they do three things. They do a lot more, but in essence, they receive, review, and report. So they receive real-time input on major police incidents. I mentioned that not only does the OIR respond to officer-involved shootings and in custodies, but members from the PRB will also respond to the scene and will be provided some exclusive access and information in regards to the circumstances. They are provided a private briefing, and they also intake community concerns and complaints. They review APD's responses to police recommendations. They also are current and proposed police policies. They also review practices and procedures of the police department. And they also do an annual report out to the community based on recommendations that they see and they feel that should be made. So the slide itself shows you in the middle, they actually have their own website. If you the information, if there's any additional information as far as how they're picked, how they're selected, it's all in the website. All their prior meetings and upcoming meetings are also posted, to include the ones that have been video recorded and the ones that have PowerPoints or presentations. All that information is for the public, so they can not only join future ones in person or on video, but they could also look at previous presentations before in the past. The board meets monthly. And they're able to be provided private closed sessions, if you will, presentations on critical incidents, including confidential information regarding MERT presentations. I'm going to talk more about the MERT presentations here at the next slide, but they also look at community trends and discuss community trends. They discuss and review law enforcement trends, use of force, legal issues, and training trends that we do at the police department. They receive law and legal updates. They discuss policies and procedures, and they offer input based from their citizens' perspective, a community member's perspective for law enforcement for us in Anaheim. The meetings are in public, and again, as I mentioned, it's all posted on the website for review. Next slide, please. So I mentioned already a couple of times the major incident review team, or what we call MERT. So what we do is whenever there's a critical an officer involved shooting, as an example, we look at it from two avenues. Well, there's multiple avenues, but because there's a criminal investigation, but there's an administrative investigation that looks at whether or not the officer's actions were within policy and procedure. But we also look at what MERT does is forward looking process. And that's if this incident were to occur again tonight, what, if any, changes do we need to look at regarding tactics, training, equipment, command and control, communication, and community post-incident recovery? So we're looking at it not only whether or not officers are in policy, but more just as important is what can we do today if we need to change something, address something, so we can mitigate any potential circumstance from occurring in the future. What's ideal about this is we don't have to wait months and months for an administrative investigation to be complete in order to be able to address these changes if needed, or additions in regards to policy or procedure, equipment, training. So we're able to address those quickly and be able to make modifications and pivot on certain things when they come up. So the MERT presentation and the MERT process is something that again, it's separate from the administrative. It's a forward-looking, and we invite several people from our organization, such as the command staff, our internal affairs, our POA staff, as well as our training unit, communications, OIR, city attorney, and risk, to be able to look at these and these 6 pillars, if you will, and to be able to again, make those adjustments and changes while the other arenas are doing their investigation, the separate criminal and administrative. On a side note, what's different in this county, in Orange County, is that whenever there's an officer involved shooting, the criminal investigation is done by the district attorney's office, regardless of whether what city it occurs in. So if a shooting occurs in the city of Anaheim, the investigation, the criminal investigation, is done by the district attorney's office. Now, obviously, if there's special circumstances, can be done by the California Department of Justice. And then the internal affairs administrative is done by the Anaheim Police Department. And now this is a third component, looking at forward thinking as far as things that we can tweak and adjust. Next slide, please. We also have a Chiefs Advisory Board. I mentioned this because it's something that, again, looking at that partnership mindset, wanting to have that community involvement, not in the after a critical incident happens, but how can we pull in our community and be actively involved in prevention, intervention, but really on the front end, and establishing those partnerships. There are 25 members from the community that are a part of the Chiefs Advisory Board, from residents to business owners to community members as a whole, people in the education field as an example. And it's a group that meets once a month. We talk about, again, it's just another opportunity for us to be able to not only engage, but provide information and get information as far as perspectives and viewpoints in regards to current events, in regards to budget, in regards to strategies, and really helping us better as an organization as we continue to move forward. Last slide, please. One of the things that's different, if you have not noticed yet, is that we don't have a city ordinance or resolution in regards to OIR or PRB. And OIR, as an example, is a direct contract with the city manager's office, and PRB is a body under the city manager's office as well. So what that allows us to do is it allows us to be able to be flexible and change and evolve as the community changes, as needs change. we're able to utilize both mechanisms and be able to evolve and change with the process. So as an example, one of the things that we really try to do is bring in the police review board to be a part on the front end. So we include them not only on the oversight and officer involved shootings and responding to those, as I mentioned already, but really we're bringing them in now in our hiring process. We want them to see what kind of candidates and officers that we are hiring, and do they fit the mold of the Anaheim Police Department. So we want them to actually have not only just a voice and a recommendation, but an ability to be able to help select future officers. We also invite them into our internal promotional process, from sergeants all the way up to the deputy chief, to the chief's office. They are a part of, again, seeing the candidates and caliber of individuals that we have in our organization. They attend not only critical incident community briefs. Whenever we have an officer involved shooting or critical incident, we will respond the next day or within the next few days to the community where the incident occurred, and be there, be available, share as much as we can, but more importantly, provide additional resources. And we bring them with us as being a part of that avenue, so people can understand the roles of the police review board and kind of how they play and how they fit into our overall operation of the organization. They receive a lot of training. We bring them in and not only provide them additional training, but we think it's important, if we have a body that is going to provide views and opinions, that they should have an understanding of kind of how we operate and our limitations, the laws, and policies and procedures. So they actually have an opportunity to not only attend the National Association of Citizen Oversight for Law Enforcement, NACL, but they also receive ongoing internal training. And then they're just a part of the organization as far as inviting them to do ride-alongs. They do PD tours. They sit in dispatch. They go up on the helicopter. They see firsthand the men and women that are out there and the challenges that they're dealing. So being able to utilize not only the PRB, but also the Chiefs Advisory Board in these various capacities, again, bringing them in on the front end as much as we can to include them in our decision making, our viewpoints. Obviously, when we're making policy decisions and budget decisions, we look at things from our own lens, and we're public servants at the end of the day. It's imperative, we believe, to be able to have that input and that viewpoint from the people that we serve. And then the last slide is regardless of the changes that will come, we are public servants, as I mentioned, and we all need to be, we understand the importance of being flexible and understanding that at the end of the day, as public servants, we have to continue to evolve and change. And our commitment as far as our organization is that we will strive to continue to be as open and transparent, but more importantly, inclusive and collaborative with the people that we serve. So I will leave it at that for now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. With that, I just want to say a quick something about where we're headed, and then I'm going to invite people to take a stretch break. When we come back, we are going to open it up for our work group members to ask some questions. I want to just acknowledge for our attendees that I'm seeing your questions. Mike and I are seeing your questions in the Q&A, and we're tracking. And then, of course, after we have the Q&A for the work group, we may weave in some of the audience questions if there's space and time. Otherwise, we will have a period of public comment at that time as well, and invite our attendees to come into the room and comment or ask their questions. So with that said, I'm just going to invite everyone to break, and let's break until 6:50. So we'll be back in about 7 minutes. Okay, I'll invite people to rejoin. And for those who can, should probably put on my headset. I'll invite people to rejoin for those who can. We know you're here when you turn your video on. I also understand if that's not an easy thing to do right now. We are going to move into a question and answer period with our work group. And then I will remind again that we have time for public comment at the end, and there will be an opportunity for people to ask questions and get a response, unlike sort of our traditional public comment period. So anything we don't get to in this public comment, I'm sorry, this Q&A portion, we'll have time hopefully not hopefully, we'll have time in the public comment space to do that as well. And yeah, for our work group members, I got a couple questions, and to just answer how this is working, we're going to invite you now. The space is open. You can unmute yourselves and ask questions of any of our panelists as follow-up to their presentations. You won't be using the Q&A function as our attendees are. So with that said.
Looks like we have Brad Hahn, who is raised.
Great. Thanks, Mike.
Hi. My question is, this whole review board idea is kind of new. And in your research, and this is to anyone of the four, in your research of those situations that didn't seem to work out real well in your investigations, what were the issues, and how did you overcome those issues in establishing what you're doing in your jurisdiction?
All our panelists are so polite. Does anybody feel like they want to take a first stab at that question?
I guess I can start. Rick Armanderas from Anaheim. So one of the things that I've seen here is that I mentioned this in my presentation, but the Police Review Board, and even with OIR, the independent auditor, it's more of a collaborative. And I think we all understand, although we come from different perspectives, the ultimate goal is to improve how we serve and how we provide that public service and public safety. Once we've established that, and we all came to the same consensus with that, then we started to work collaboratively into that. Listen, again, at the end of the day, there needs to be an oversight. The police department is the only entity that can take a life in order to protect a life. And it's imperative that we have an oversight in as far as the checks and balances. And but it's having that right checks and balances. As far as if it starts off adversarial, it's going to continue to be adversarial. You saw in some of the presentations that the barriers that start. I can tell you that just anecdotally, you look at cities like Chicago, you look at Seattle, you look at Oakland. Oakland has 4 different oversights, to include a consent decree where a judge has been appointed and assigned for the last 19 years. I guess my question is, do you think there's a strong trust between the police department and the community there after all that? So the question really is, what's the intent, at least that I would ask if you were to ask me, what's the intent? If your intent is you don't have trust in the organization, then yeah, bringing in an outside auditor to do that, subject matter expert. If it's something different, a collaborative, improving, then there's different avenues for that. And I think that, like I mentioned, the model that we have, what I enjoy about it is it allows us to be flexible and to be able to adjust and evolve as we go, because what we started off with is not where we're at today.
Thank you.
If I could say something about that. So in Sonoma County, the process for civilian oversight has gone through some transitions. And I would say, even though I think that the public has spoken very strongly that they want to go a certain direction with this new model that's been strengthened, my own personal opinion is, whatever you may do in terms of passing new laws, until the leader of the law enforcement agency is agreeable to collaborate with that process, it's still not going to really work effectively, because civilian oversight is very valuable. I think it's necessary, but the primary determinant of whether an agency is responsive to the community is the leader of that agency. And then, from there down through, I'd say probably the second thing that's most important is the supervising sergeants, and then the folks out in the patrol on the field. And so it's complicated. So I think the more important things are, do you have a commitment in an agency to have process improvement mechanisms in place? Do you have a commitment to community engagement that involves the oversight agency? And probably the toughest area is there is a history between these agencies and communities that is really troubling and difficult and challenging. And until both the community and the agencies are ready to engage that history and start working through those issues, it's going to continue to be tense and difficult. So I think those are the real issues, rather than particular model.
Thank you both for that. I want to ask a follow-up question, because Brad also said this is a relatively new idea. And then we had a question come in about how new is it? And many of you have been working with review or oversight boards for a while. Is there a quick answer to how long this idea has been around? And then Dr. Watson, I see you unmuted yourself, so I'll come to you.
Yes, I would just add that where you should start at is your community and your organization, and assessing where you are, especially organizational culture, because that's going to dictate what direction you all should go in. Every situation, every state, every city, every entity is very different. And speaking from the perspective of, I've been on the side of recruit officer all the way up to chief of police, and then I've been on the side of overseeing the Office of Civilians and civilian oversight. So I come from different directions, but it still comes back to what is the organizational culture of that city and that department to dictate whether or not the oversight function is necessary. Because the city of Sacramento, first city that I've worked in with oversight. All the other 4 cities do not have police oversight. Now, in one of them that I went to be the chief of police, there was a major reform effort there, and they were trying to change the culture there to get away from going into a consent decree with the U.S. Department of Justice. Majority of my career was spent in the city of Arlington, Texas, which is we're still home of the Dallas Cowboys and the Texas Rangers. But again, that is a very internationally recognized, reputable organization that has never had oversight, and they don't have these key community relations issues that some of the other organizations I've worked at have. So the first step is looking at Modesto, looking at the culture, looking at what the community is talking about, and assessing what they're talking about according to the variables that exist and the elements that exist within the city.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Hauptmann, I see you unmuted. Is there something you'd like to add?
Yes, I was going to say that when the police commission first started, before it got to the actual becoming part of the charter, there was a concern by the police association as to who was being selected by the council to be on the board. And what happened is, and this is my understanding, because when I came to the commission, there was some tension and turmoil. And this was expressed to me by the council members and the city manager's office. And what they felt, a couple of the mistakes they made is who they selected to be on the actual commission, because there were a couple that many felt, because they were part of a activist that was not very favorable to law enforcement, were on there, that they would bring their own personal agency agendas to try to use the commission for that purpose. And you had a couple of others that were put on that board that probably were a little too much in favor of law enforcement. There was constant conflict between the two. And what they learned is that we have to be more cautious and ensure that we're finding the right people to come in here and being objective. And that's being objective on behalf of the community and on behalf of the police department itself. Because in the beginning, there was such distrust. And it took a lot of years to bring all this together where there was mutual trust once again. So those were some of the growing pains that they went through. Also, you have to have a police chief, a department head that is very inviting to this idea and is open to it and is transparent. That was not necessarily the case in the beginning. There was conflict there. I'm not, trying to point any fingers at anyone, but there was conflict with that. But I will say that when Sergio Diaz, who was the deputy chief with LAPD, came to Riverside, he was very familiar with police commissions. And with him, he was completely open to it. And he invited the commissioners to come meet with him. He listened to policy recommendation changes. As a matter of fact, he really enjoyed the fact that the commissioners realized that, hey, you're having incidents here where not every officer had a taser. And when one taser didn't work, then there was no other taser on the scene. And so it had to go into a deadly force situation. Could that maybe have been prevented had there been someone else with a taser? So they made a recommendation to the city council that every officer be issued a taser and be trained in it. And that's what happened. And it was an agreement, and the police chief loved it because he wanted to do that, but we're going to have to get into a special part of the budget for it. So there were growing pains, but after 20 some years, it's now at a position where there is confidence and trust. So I think for the most part for Riverside, with their model, it's worked pretty well.
Great. A couple questions I have in the wings. I'm tracking what's coming into the Q&A, but I want to stick with our work group for a few. Work group members, if you have a question you'd like to ask, go ahead and unmute yourselves or raise your hand.
Matthew Mason.
Hello, thank you so much for doing this panel for us. Mr. Threet, the first speaker, you said that there was a grievance from the police labor union against the organization of the review board. Are you able to articulate what that grievance is?
Yes, the grievance is that the county failed to meet and confer on changes to working conditions for the deputies in the agency. The county's position is that the reform of the existing civilian oversight agency is not a change in working conditions because the agency is in significant part only advisory. So those are the two positions.
Thank you. One more question just for anyone who'd like to jump in on it. Can you compare the efficacy of a citizen review board that has an independent auditor and a citizen review board that doesn't have an independent auditor?
I don't mind starting with this one. The city of Riverside does not have an independent auditor, but one of the things that was raised by the commission itself is an audit being done with the Internal Affairs Division. And there was agreement with the police department. They felt like, okay, we're open to that. So what they've done is twice a year, a couple of members of the commission, typically it's the chair and the vice chair, and myself, do an audit within the Internal Affairs Bureau itself, and then issue a public statement as to what they found in that. But it's much different than the audits that Anaheim has, or a couple of these other agencies, but it allows the commissioners the opportunity to ensure that every complaint that's filed, that there's a case number issued, because that became a problem for a while, because many agencies use the lexical policy manual system. And when a complaint is filed, that's more of a policy and procedure complaint. It is, the finding for that is typically an inquiry. So there's no investigations because it's a policy procedure request. Well, the commission was concerned that how do we know that that's really in fact what that inquiry was about? So the change that was made is that inquiries, every complaint gets a case number, every single one of them. And the commission does review those that are incomplete, those that are deemed an inquiry, to ensure that do they concur or not concur with the commission. And if they don't concur, they can initiate their own independent investigation.
Thank you. Solange Altman?
Actually, Mike and Solange, just give me 1 second, because I want to
Yes.
invite our interpreter, Roberto, to just make one more or another announcement about the interpretation services that are available. So let's just pause for 1 moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Roberto, you'll need to switch to the English channel to announce to our audience here in the English side.
Thank you, Edgar.
We still can't hear you, Roberto.
Okay, so we're still not hearing you. I'll just, we can text and we'll figure out when to bring you back in. And then before we go to Solange, I definitely see you. I think that Mr. Threet would like to respond to the last question. Am I correct?
Yeah, just shortly. The challenge is that community review panels often are set up with different missions. So most traditionally, the original ones were investigative bodies, and auditors typically don't investigate cases. They audit investigations that are performed by the police agency. So that's a real difference between them. So it's I would say that auditors tend to be more accepted by police agencies, and therefore they have a greater legitimacy with departments in a lot of cases. But if you train the right people really well on an investigative police review board, that can work well also.
Thank you. Solange, we're going to come to you. I also understand that we are going to lose Deputy Chief Armanderas in about 5 minutes. So just let people know about that.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So I
Just lost you, Solange. There you go.
I have a question I'd like to pose to all 4 panelists. So what effect or impact has your oversight model, because you've given us various ones that have been used in your city. What effect has it had on reducing use of force incidents, bias complaints, constitutional violations? If you can think of specific things that occurred that were beneficial, you can highlight those as Mr. Hauptmann just talked a little bit about that. Anyway, I just want to get an idea what benefits these different models, how they've been beneficial to your communities.
I guess I can start with that one. For us, what I've seen, it's made us a better organization because we were able to look at our policies, procedures on a more consistent, more real-time basis, look at our training, our practices, and evolve and change. And just because we have thought of doing it a certain way for a long period of time doesn't mean that it's necessarily right, or it can change or alter. So for us, what I've seen is I see us constantly reevaluating our policies, reevaluating our training, reevaluating our tactics, reevaluating kind of how we operate on a daily basis based on the input and recommendations from not only OIR, but also the Police Review Board and really the Chiefs Advisory Board as well, that those 3 components give us the ability to have that ongoing dialogue and that collaboration, as I've been mentioning, to make us more efficient public servants.
Thank you.
How about the others?
Anyone else?
I can give you a few examples for IOLERO in Sonoma County. I say the biggest overall difference is that the public is just much more informed about, the mission and the practices and policies of the sheriff's office than ever before. Sheriffs are a special case. I think they're elected officials. They tend to be elected in many of them in years that are not high turnout years, sometimes in June elections, where the only other people that are getting elected are representatives of the Democratic Party, things like that, rather than other elected officials. And so there's not been a lot of focus on, how the agencies operate, and IOLERO's had a great deal of effect on that. In the first few years of operation of the office, uses of force by the sheriff in Sonoma County fell pretty significantly, and there were no deaths for quite some time. I can't, directly tie that to anything IOLERO did, but the existence of the agency and the greater public attention on what was going on in the sheriff's office, I think, had some effect on the self-consciousness of the deputies. And so I think everyone was kind of on their best behavior. And then a really concrete example, the office recommended changes to the policy of the sheriff in cooperating with civil immigration enforcement, and significantly limiting the areas of cooperation. And the sheriff's office took that recommendation and implemented those changes, and that's affected a lot of the immigrant community members in Sonoma County.
Thank you. Edgar, can we have you to make that announcement for Spanish interpretation for us, please?
Absolutely, Michael. Thank you. Hola, bienvenidos si hay alguna persona si gusta escuchar esta reunión en español, puede oprimir el icono por debajo de su pantalla que dice interpretación, y oprime el canal de español para escuchar la reunión en español. Gracias. Back over to you, Michael.
All right. We have Linda Mayo. Linda, you can unmute yourself. Do you have a question?
Okay, yes. I was wondering, currently in Modesto, we have a great deal of mistrust of the police department due to several different deaths occurring, several with a mentally ill person, and a police officer as well. But so I'm curious as to how each of you feel the success of your program. Does it show a change in the amount of trust that the public has? If it's, if it's only the police department that is being the audit, or if it has an additional external audit.
Thank you. And Dr. Watson, would you like to begin us off with that answer?
Sure. What I would say is from the city of Sacramento standpoint, I would say it's a multifaceted response. One thing I found is, especially with my office listening to a lot of the community members vent about some of the historical scars that they've endured and some of the past interactions that they've had with public safety is that having that checks and balances for individuals who work outside of the police department and the fire department to look at the allegations of misconduct has assisted with building back the trust that has been lost. One of the things that we found also is that sometimes some of the mistrust is really due to a lack of educational awareness. So being a third party and explaining to them some of the different intricacies that's involved in investigations and why something may not have been sustained that they felt like was misconduct, but it wasn't, has provided the community some additional knowledge that they did not have. So being able to share that information. So not only have we been able to correct some of the concerns that the public has had, but then we've also been able to be advocates for the police or fire departments when things have been done correctly, and that a lack of educational awareness made someone or lead someone to believe that something wasn't done right. So we've served in different capacities, being advocates for the police department as well as being advocates for the community.
Thank you. Frank?
Yeah, I was going to say that having a collaborative effort, which was just described in Sacramento, is very similar, I would say, what we have in Riverside. And it has made what I feel is a significant difference in the way the community now looks at the police department versus before, because folks in the community, they realize that the commissioners, they look at these investigations from cover to cover. And if there's any issues, any problems, any biases, first of all, I would point them out, because I'm, for the most part, if I see an issue with it, I'm going to raise it. I'm going to bring it up as far as the investigation is concerned. But you had police chiefs that were very open to change. I had a chief said, hey, I'm thick-skinned, said, no worries. If we're doing something we need to change, the practices of the commission wants to come and talk to me about it, I want to do that. And having that kind of openness, I think that's key, having that department head being that open to it. But as time has gone on, that trust, it seems the trust factor has really changed. When I first came to the commission, the audience was, it was full at times, sometimes half full in the council chambers. And activists would come up, you get your 3 minutes, or you get up to 5 minutes if you're a complainant. And that has diminished over the years, in the last 10 years, to where there's maybe sometimes only 5 people that show up. Because a lot of the concerns that they had were addressed through the commission and changes were made. And so I think that provided a lot of trust in the police department that has changed. The relationship is much better. You're still going to have little pockets of issues and problems that come and go. But I'll tell you, the body-worn cameras have made such a difference, where these commissioners can be right there and take a look and to see what the allegation is, what's being alleged, and what they're being said, what's being said, what is rude and what is not rude. If an officer has to elevate his voice because he's got to get someone's attention, is that being rude, or is it a tactic by police? And so, just like with Sacramento, there's also an educational part that goes toward the community as well when the officers have done things right. And having that kind of understanding, the collaborative effort works.
Thank you. Mr. Threet, I see that you want to come in, but I know we're going to lose Deputy Chief, Armanderas. And so, Mr. Threet, I'd love to come back to you and just invite you, Chief Armanderas, to provide any final thoughts and allow us to thank you for your time tonight. But anything you'd like to say before we say goodbye to you?
No, thank you again for the opportunity, and those that are, again, volunteering their time to, this is an important topic, and we all know the importance of having this, building this trust moving forward. The only thing that I would say is that, in my personal opinion, collaborative and building trust will go a lot farther than having something adversarial. And how you get there, again, as mentioned by the other presenters, you need to have the buy-in and the support from agencies, which I can tell you right now, that your chief and I'm sure your POA and members of your organization are open to evolving and changing. It's just doing things for the right reason, and really what is the intent is what it boils down to. And the last thing I'll share is it's a very difficult arena, because as a department head, and just there are at least 5 different arenas when we talk about officer involved shootings or critical incidents that we need to operate in. One is the public arena. We want to be able to share as much as we can with the community, and that where transparency comes in. Unfortunately, we also have to deal with other arenas. The criminal arena, we have to make sure that we preserve the integrity of a criminal investigation. So there are limitations and challenges that we have to work with the DA's office on. What can we release? What do we want to release? There's the administrative aspect of it. We have to look at the rights of the employees and making sure that that we're adhering to, again, the laws with the administrative aspect of it. There's the civil liability, and that's where the city attorneys come in, and risk and liability, and are certain things protected. And then there's the last thing is the risk as well. So all these different avenues a police chief, department head has to maneuver through, but at the same time making sure that they're transparent, open, and upfront, and dealing with the issues that need to be addressed. So it is definitely an ongoing challenge and something that is in my position now being here for 2.5 years, very unique. But I think there's definitely mechanisms to do that. It's just having that buy-in and that collaboration. So thank you for the time, and I'm available if there's any further questions or follow-up that you guys need.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Yeah, you too. So, Mr. Threet, I'd love to give you a chance to say what you were going to say, and then I'm going to invite public comment, which is another opportunity for the questions to continue. And we have some in the chat that maybe some will be able to ask live, or Mike and I can bring them into the room. But Mr. Threet, is there something you'd like to add before we do that?
Sure. Just, the president's report on 21st century policing many years ago at this point said something very wise, which is that the legitimacy of a police agency depends in significant part on its ability to collaborate with the community and ask them how they want to be policed. And civilian oversight provides an opportunity to facilitate that process. And, as I said before, it's going to depend on everyone having collaborative approach. And Ms. Mayo's question was, how's that worked in our different jurisdictions? In Sonoma County, I would say it's still a work in progress. And there's an election coming up this year for a new sheriff. Our existing sheriff, who really is kind of the peak of non-collaboration since the office has been established, is not running for re-election. And all the 4 candidates who are running have promised greater collaboration. So I think the county's going to turn the corner soon. So we'll see how that works out. And then in the city of Richmond, they've had civilian oversight for about 20 years now. And it's a totally different situation where the public talks about how the police used to be and how the police are now. And it's really night and day from the perspective of the public. So it really can assist over time. But it's not a quick process.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I'm going to invite our chairperson, Will Kelly, to facilitate the rest of this meeting. And of course, Mike and I will jump in as is helpful. So Will, go ahead.
Sure thing. Thanks, Kate. So we're going to go to public comment now. So I want to encourage any member of the public who wants to speak to use the raise hand button to indicate that. And as I think Kate mentioned earlier, we're going to do something a little bit different. So you're going to have the opportunity to ask a question and get an answer within the public comment period. So just remember, if you are asking a question, the shorter the question, the more time we'll have for the panelists to respond. And so I don't see any hands up yet, but I imagine we maybe have at least a couple of people who want to make public comments. I'll give, oh, I see a hand up now. So well, Edgar, will you be promoting people to panelists so they can speak? Is that how this will work?
I can actually
do Kate will do that. Excellent.
Yeah. Managing different
Excellent.
screen
So
sharing and everything.
It looks like
yeah. Michael
and then Stephen were the first two to have their hands up.
So
Okay,
Michael,
confirming you got it?
Yep.
Great.
Michael Schiffelbein, I will bring you in now.
And Michael, it looks like you're a panelist now, so just unmute and ask your question wherever you're ready.
Yeah, so it seems like the ballot initiative has been important in establishing commissions or oversight committees. What would that look like in Modesto? What would it look like to start a ballot initiative? Anybody?
So we got it over here.
Kalua, I see Kalua's, yeah, go ahead.
So Kalua Barnes, Deputy City Manager. And then we've got Alex on the phone here. I think probably the question is whether one needs a ballot initiative. They've talked about some in the charter, some in ordinance. There's a path forward if, in fact, the community is interested in establishing one that can be done without it being a ballot initiative. I think the ballot initiative becomes the place where, and Jerry, you can comment on this, if there's a perception from the community that they want X and there's no one elected who's listening to them, the ballot is the pathway to get to force that action. But many of these organizations maybe they're in the charter here, but in some jurisdictions where they've got some form of oversight, there is not a ballot measure. It wasn't necessary. So I think the ballot measure is kind of next to the near end last resort, because there are pathways that don't necessarily require that.
So
But if you wanted to, then we'd need to talk more, and it'll be longer than this period of time allows. But happy to talk more.
Thank you.
let me just say there are pluses and minuses to ballot measures. Because if you put something in a ballot, the only way you can change it is to go back to the ballot.
Yep.
The advantage of it is that if you feel insecure about whether the reform you make is going to be stable and not taken away in the future, then that provides you that security, but it's less flexible.
Appreciate that.
All right.
Okay.
Any other comments from the panel on ballot first? If not, we will move to Stephen and then Darlene after Stephen.
Okay, just give me a second. Here you go, Stephen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Like really loud and I just heard everybody's ears?
A little, just a tiny bit. Go ahead, Stephen.
One thing that has been on my mind through this entire meeting, it has a lot to do with the power dynamics involved. And one specific example of that, like we keep talking about building trust. And I personally don't think it's as about building trust, at least not as often as people keep repeating those kind of phrases. It's not about building and collaborating. A lot of the presenters tonight basically just repackaged police speak and applied it as if that has anything to do with improving our community. The binary, the whole opposition between, what was it, collaboration and I forget the other word now, but it started with an A, and it's basically like what you guys all probably know me for. But what I'm getting at is we want a community where we know cops aren't killing us, cops aren't committing sexual crimes, cops aren't doing coke, not being held accountable, cops don't fail their psyche vows over and over and over again and still get to be cops in our town. So basically what I'm getting at is we have to acknowledge the power structure. When we were all kids, we had parents of some sort or a guardian. Maybe some of us didn't. So I apologize, but the analogy is still, hopefully helpful. But I think in human relationships, you have to decide what the power structure is. And in this one, the people are in charge because it's a democracy. We are supposed to live in a democratic society. So basically my question relates to independence and the ways that word applies to like every aspect of this. And an example I want to give that is not what I hope we mean when we talk about independent bodies. After Trevor Seaver was murdered by the Modesto Police Department, in a city council meeting, the then intern chief, Brandon Gillespie, got on the microphone, made a public statement, and told the entire community in the world of whoever was watching that there were 3 independent investigations. And then when he explained that, 2 of them were his people, and one of them was Birgit Flatigers, who has a Modesto cop working for her as an investigator. So, I mean, we can go around in circles forever. What's up?
You're approaching 3 minutes, so I'll ask you to land the
plane.
plane.
We can go in circles, but I think we need to talk about what independence means in any given body, and we also need to be aware that these are about civil rights violations in so many cases. So it's way less important that like we address like union issues and whether the employee's this or that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So I don't know if any of the panelists want to comment on independence and collaboration and how those two interact at all.
It looks like we may have lost some of our panelists.
Okay.
So I'm going to check on that, but
I see Jerry and I see Frank at least.
okay, there's Frank. Okay.
Yep.
So independence has been defined different ways institutionally for these kind of agencies or bodies by different jurisdictions. You have everything from the city of Detroit electing their community review board members to, something where they're all chosen by the mayor. And those are different kinds of, systems. So they have different lenses on what independence means. But the reality is for all of these bodies that they're government sponsored entities and therefore are answerable in some way to a government appointee unless they're elected, and then they're answerable to the people that elect them. The other component is, I think it's a very important statement that this is about civil rights. And I also think, from my own personal opinion, that union rights are also civil rights, workers' rights are civil rights. So the employees also have their rights, their due process rights as employees. And that's a legal requirement for the process. And if those aren't honored, then whatever action gets taken, there's been examples in Detroit, for example, where determinations.
Sorry, Jerry, just to keep things moving, we're a little over a 3-minute window.
Okay.
On that.
All right.
But I
Go ahead.
appreciate the comments, and I'm sure the theme will come up again. So I see Darlene, and then Ramon, and then Bianca is the next three in line. Darlene, go ahead and unmute whenever you're ready.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Hello, I'm Darlene Ruiz. My son is Trevor Seaver. I know we're on this forum and to help our city of Modesto with transparency and trust. And I hope to be a part of that in honor of my son, Trevor Seaver. I think this has been a long time coming, and unfortunately things weren't taken care of before I lost my son. The officer that shot my son, this has been his 5th killing. So, and he killed somebody 6 weeks before. He shot somebody 6 weeks before he shot my son. So there's a reason why there's no trust or transparency in our city. My question is, for any of you that have had a police auditor, an independent police auditor in your city, how did it help your city and in which ways? And also, how long did it take to get a civilian review board going into your city?
Thank you, Darlene. To any of our panelists, role of an independent auditor and how long it took to get a review board up and running.
I believe that we are probably confusing some of our community members because each one of us has different frameworks and we don't have independent auditors. The city of Sacramento has an auditor's office that's totally separate from the office to oversee, which is the Office of Public Safety Accountability. So I think there's so many different models out there that it can get very cumbersome for people to understand what's best or what it is that they really want to see that their particular community have. Every single city seems to be different with the ones that do have oversight.
I'll just say that the history, like Sonoma County, for example, there were calls for independent oversight and in the 1990s, and those didn't, and the Civil Rights Commission called for it also, and it didn't happen. It took other troubling incidents and deaths before there was disruption in the community significant enough that the Board of Supervisors created this office. And I think over time that things have shifted. After the Black Lives Matter protests, there seems to have been a pretty significant shift, and there's a proliferation of these agencies that are happening across the country. So I think we're in a different place than we were.
Thank you, Jerry. Next, we have Ramon. And I'll just ask anyone else who's planning to make a public comment, please raise your hand now to get in the queue, just so we can gauge time. And Ramon, whenever you're ready to unmute, go ahead. Ramon, hopefully you're seeing a little, oh, here you are.
Yes, I remember way back in 2014 when Frank Carson, the criminal defense attorney, was running for district attorney, and one of his goals, as if elected as DA back then against Birgit Flatiger, is the creation of a civilian review board for the county, not just for a particular city, but for entire counties. So that'll make civilians easier to file complaints against law enforcement. So my question is, should there be a civilian review board possible on the county level? Because this is not just for Modesto or Turlock or any cities around, but I want to see it in the county level so that people will be easier to file, not just police departments, but sheriffs, any law enforcement. And that's all I have to say. I hope someone can answer my question.
Thanks, Ramon. And of course, this work group is advising the city. So we're going to make recommendations to the city, not the county. But Jerry, I know you have experience with both. So anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I'll just answer the question because this issue has come up in Sonoma County repeatedly. I mean, it is the fact that many community members don't necessarily understand that there are different levels of law enforcement working for different jurisdictions in a county. And so when they encounter law enforcement, they may think of it as the sheriff, all of them as a sheriff. And so if you're asking people to figure out which place that they should be able to file the complaint that they have, it can be very confusing and difficult. So in Sonoma County, there's continuing talk about having a memorandum of agreement between all of the local cities, towns, and the county so that IOLERO will be the one-stop shop for complaints filed, and so that agency would do the work for all of the different law enforcement agencies. And that's a possibility, but it's complicated and it requires an agreement among all the different jurisdictions.
Thanks, Jerry. All right, so I see Bianca's hand up, and I think that's the last public comment. If there's anyone else who wants to make a public comment who hasn't already, put your hand up, and then we'll go to any questions in the Q&A we didn't get to and make sure we cover as many of those. So Bianca, whenever you're able to unmute, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for the presenters. The information that you presented was very thorough and easy to understand. Again, I just wanted to come here and ask that the Forward Together Committee make a formal recommendation to the city of Modesto to move forward with what some of the ideas that were presented here. Of course, we know it's going to take time and that it may not look like any of these four. But we would like the committee to make this recommendation to the city to implement a civilian review board and an independent auditor so that we can start these growing pains that you are talking about, because we are ready for that. We don't want this to be a gotcha kind of move with the Modesto Police Department. We want to be able to trust our local police to protect us, not terrorize us, and not to kill us. And you're right, I think it does seem like our chief is open to change and to change a police culture. We saw a video of a brutal beating of Alonso Nunez last year in January. And now we've known that, you know, the chief has actually changed policy, but it shouldn't take a brutal beating or civil unrest to make stuff happen. Unfortunately, that is what has come down to. The people that are speaking here today, they are the reason why this Forward Together committee is created. So I just want to give the community members who are listening props for making this happen. Civil unrest does work, and it can work to do other things, but collaboration is better. I would also ask the committee to hold listening sessions from the community in English and Spanish and maybe other languages, and not necessarily at the city council meetings. We want to be able to tell you our stories of what policing looks like, and then also tell you what we would want it to look like. I don't think the city council meetings are the space for it, and I don't think it needs to be recorded. And I would appreciate it if police were not in attendance. We want to be able to feel comfortable. As I said, we don't trust the police department. I myself, I personally don't trust that the police can, nor do I believe that they should police themselves. Currently, we believe that the DA is, I don't know what proper term, a crooked DA, and we don't trust her office and we don't trust her. We believe there is conflict of interest in a current investigation with the murder of Trevor Seaver by Joseph Lamontia. But if you could share a little bit about the funding, where does the funding come from?
Good question.
That was about 3 minutes, but that was our last public comment. So briefly, any comments from the panel on funding?
I will start with that one. When it was decided that this is what the community wanted and what the city felt was in its best interest, they developed a budget specifically for it, making a determination. Again, you have to look at how do you want it to look? Do you want to have your own investigators, or do you have the internal affairs investigations come to a review board? That cost factor is going to be, it's going to change, it's going to be different. So it really depends on the city's budget to begin with. But then again, what did you want it to look like, and fit your budget into what you want it to look like? And as far as Riverside is concerned, that's how they looked at it. And like I said, I think when it comes to civilian oversight, you have to tailor it to the community itself. And that's why you look at a lot of different models to see, okay, here's the different models, but what's going to fit us? What is it that we want out of this? And how can we make it fit into our budgetary constraints?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, Jerry, go ahead. Yeah.
I would say budget is the most important question of all, because a budget reflects the values of the elected body. And so if folks are saying this is important to them, then it should be funded adequately. The task force that recommended IOLERO said it should be set up with a staff of 6. It was established with a staff of 2. And the board said, we'll come back next year after it has a year under its belt and we'll see what happens. Well, every year after that, there were budget constraints. And so it never got funded at 6 until the measure went to the ballot. So make sure to get it funded as you need it up front at the beginning.
All right. And I see Wendy's hand up, and we haven't heard from Wendy. So yeah, do you have a question or comment, Wendy, right now?
Yes, I do. Forgive me if I'm asking something that's already been discussed. My signal dropped a couple times, but I want to thank the panel. This has been very informative. My question has to go back to the charter, the city charter. Is it too late to get something into the city charter? That may be a question for Scotty or Kalua. I know we finished the charter review committee recommendations a little while back, a few months back. Is it too late to have something placed in the charter?
So I think
please, Kalua. Yeah.
And I think Jose and or Alex, a couple folks from our city attorney's office is on the call as well. The challenge is that the four together isn't created to make the recommendation it's premature. The recommendations haven't gone to the council. So for you all to finish your work and this recommendation and get to the council, it will be too late when you're done. We're actually bumping up against late now. Any charter, as I understand it, any language for an item that might be on the ballot is due late May, early June. So we're bumping up against that for this cycle. To the extent that there was some interest in doing it, there may be, it'll be a very expensive special initiative. So answer is for this charter review, it's probably too late. But I want to, kind of to the earlier comment, and that is there's not a need for it to be in a charter. And in fact, I think it was Frank that mentioned, or Jerry, the beauty of it being in the charter is that it's fixed. The problem is you can't change it. And if you're building something that is this new and you want to be able to refine it in a way that gives you the most benefit as you discover what is and isn't working, the charter may not be the best way. If you were asking me, I'd say whatever the recommendation is, start by seeing if what's working and then tweak it. And if in fact the amount of the desired outcome is not being achieved for some reason that requires it being in the charter, that's the path. But it's premature to say that it needs to be in the charter because the recommendation hasn't even been made and the council hasn't considered it.
Yep, and we have not even figured out what we're going to recommend, and
Right.
that would determine what it would take to do it. So yeah, absolutely. So I think just looking at the time, Kate, is there maybe one or two questions from the Q&A that we didn't get to? Is there anything kind of particularly?
Yeah, I think I'd like to just, at least given the time that we have and the fact that we still need to do just a couple of updates and announcements, but I would like to bring in a question that was posed early on, which I just lost, but I'm going to find it very quickly.
And I'll say when Kate will give this last question, it'd be great to hear from each of our panelists. And just along with that, if you have any kind of closing thoughts for us or any last words, and then we'll thank you all for your time and do a little housekeeping. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, yeah, for that. So one question though that was posed in the Q&A was just about the kind of experience or qualifications you guys have required of people who were independent auditors or directors. I know it's going to look different depending on their role, but what kinds of experience and qualifications are you looking for those folks who are at the head of these boards and institutions?
It depends a lot on your model. I mean, if you have a civilian review board, depending on the mission you give it, you would have different kinds of qualifications for directors. An auditor tends to be a whole different thing. You need somebody with professional qualifications in auditing standards and or legal background. It can be really helpful to have someone with a legal background to deal with complicated issues around police confidentiality laws and employee rights, and make sure all of that's taken care of while you're also doing the work of bringing greater transparency. So it depends a lot on what your model is. That's what I have to say. Unfortunately, it's not a simple answer.
Yeah, of course. And I see that your panelists agree with you. Dr. Watson, let's hear from you, and then I'll invite final thoughts.
I was going to share the same thing, that it's just depending on what the model is. The office that I oversee, as I said before, for the Inspector General, who is doing concurrent independent investigations of all serious bodily injury or officer-involved shootings or in-depth custodies. He was an independent investigator for the Chicago Police Department. So, and he's also a licensed attorney. And some of my other staff that I just hired, who started last week, is an attorney from Seattle. And then, of course, my background within law enforcement, I have another employee who was also in law enforcement. The one thing I will say, when you start looking at dealing with police departments, is one of the callers said this also, is that you want to hire people who are able to look at things and understand what they're looking at, because being in law enforcement and being a cop my entire, I guess, the last 20 something years, you want to be able to have someone who can point out some of the BS that is always said in policing. We do a lot of talking and what I would call just providing information in order to give someone, to take them on a different path. So you want someone to understand what is going on and call BS on stuff when they say they can't share this, they don't want to provide this. So I found that you need people who understand the intricacies within police departments. You want to understand the verbiage that is utilized, because when something is said, if you don't understand, you have not been in those environments, you will just go off of what they say, and then that could lead you in the wrong direction and not understanding that they are doing something they have no business doing. So again, when you start to develop these groups, you want people with experience so they can actually point out stuff and lead the way to improvement. Because other than that, it's just the goal of having optics to say we have this. You don't want optics. You want someone who can come in and really work toward effecting change within your city, not just someone to say we have this, but it's not meaningful and it's not effective.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. So I am going to invite, and Mr. Hauptmann, I invite you to include any of your thoughts and maybe your final comments. We just have a couple minutes before we have to transition to something else before we end things. So we'll start with you, Mr. Hauptmann, and then invite others for final comments.
Okay, well, I can make it short, because I was going to just say exactly what you just heard. I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know if I could have said it any better. it really takes, at least for my position, there's a lot of confidence and trust in the fact that of my background and experience, and no one's going to bamboozle me, and they know it. And even when the audits come and looking at things, making my own recommendations, you have to have someone that can understand the culture and has been in that culture, but probably at a higher level of managing and things of that nature. So, this is, you're going along, I think, is a very good and productive road for what it is that you want to do for your community. And eventually you'll go through those steps. That's probably going to take you to, well, let's do this and let's form a model and go in that direction. But by listening to the other panelists, you have a wealth of information from them. And I hope you were able to glean enough from me as well. And I truly believe in civilian oversight. I wouldn't say I always have when I was first an officer. If you brought that up, in the 70s, I hate to age myself here. It could have been, well, why are they doing this? But in this day and age, I just really truly believe that civilian oversight and checks and balances and making sure that the systems are going in the right direction, and having the opportunity, ability to make recommendations for policy changes, and there's an openness to that. You're going down the right road, in my opinion, and I wish all the luck to you. And if I can ever be of any assistance in any way, I'm more than happy to do so. And I thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And I think now, Jerry and LaTesha, any final closing, brief, I hate to say that, but just because we're running up on time, any closing thoughts, brief closing thoughts?
I would just echo those same sentiments. Outstanding job for doing all that you all are doing to figure out what is best for the city of Modesto. In this day and age is very important, and coming from a long, extensive law enforcement background, I would just say we talked a lot about making sure you have the leader that supports oversight. And from all the consulting work that I do, what I would say is that you don't need to raise your hand to be a chief of police if you don't have an understanding of the benefits of having oversight within your city. This day and age and the things that have happened throughout this country that have tried to chip away at what a noble profession this is, we are at the time where it's necessary and it's needed, and we should be open to anything that can help build this profession back to the reputation that it once had. So I would just say that the leaders that are in place in these different cities across this country, should they have an issue or resistance to any type of oversight, shame on them, and they need to find them a different profession, because a real leader makes tough decisions. They ask tough questions because that's what you raised your hand to do. And if you are not a leader, then you should not have that title as chief of police.
Oh, thank you to the other panelists, and actually thank you all who are serving on this committee. It's tough work, and it's needed. I 100% recommend civilian oversight for your police department, for every police department. I think it's a value added for the department and for the community. And one thing I just want to add to the conversation here at the end is that I agree with everyone who said it's very important that the folks who are involved in it be objective and that their allegiance be to the truth, not to any particular sector of the city or the communities. But I also think it's important to realize that the purpose of civilian oversight is to serve the community primarily. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists. Really appreciate your time and expertise. And I can assure you, if we have questions we didn't get to tonight, we'll be following up and reaching out. And I think you've provided with a lot of insight. So thank you all.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a few kind of important things to get to. Tom, I see you have your hand up. Do you have something brief and urgent that you want to get in
Yeah,
right
very
now?
quick.
Yep.
Again, thanks to all the panelists. Like that's already been said, but I just wanted to provide an extra resource. I know we've brought it up before, kind of leading up to the formation of Forward Together. There was another a town hall that was on YouTube, and I just want to let people know about it. That has It gets into some of the specifics a little bit more depending on what the specifics are, like how
brief time
commission members were selected and stuff like that. So if you go on YouTube, look up Modesto Town Hall Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, and you should be able to find it if you want to watch another town hall where these issues are talked about. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. So just very briefly want to talk about where we are in the process, where we're going, some of our next steps. Two exciting things in the process right now. First of all three of our ad hoc groups are up and running and have had at least one meeting, which is exciting. And this is also the end of the educational program that was planned out when this work group was formed. Obviously not the end of learning and education, but of that particular series of meetings that we had designed for ourselves. So what is going to happen next month is the alternative response and policies and procedures ad hoc groups are developing what we're kind of calling concept recommendations. So not every detail worked out, but kind of a concept of where those two ad hoc groups are headed. So in February, when we meet, representatives from those ad hoc groups will share what's been going on in those meetings and talk about where we're at and have questions and kind of discussion topics for the work group and for members of the public. Which related to that, the minutes of the meetings that have been typed up so far were in your agenda packet. And I'm told by staff the minutes will be up on the website, available to everyone within a week. So if you just can't wait to hear from the ad hoc groups next month, you can review the minutes in your packet. And then the accountability ad hoc group, the third group, we actually had a meeting yesterday, but it was prior, obviously, to all of this information. So we didn't delve into the subject matter, but that group is going to be meeting again in approximately 2 weeks to kind of get on and to try and hit the ground running now that we've received this information. I'll just very, very briefly say a few words. If anyone else on the ad hoc group feels the need to jump in or correct something or add something, feel free. But the alternate response ad hoc group is going to talk about scaling up existing programs and improving collaboration and information sharing. And the policies and procedures ad hoc group is going to talk about some of the issues that have been discussed and ideas for how to extend that conversation beyond Forward Together. So that's just a quick snapshot of what we'll be talking about next month. Looking ahead, we'll hear at some point, possibly in March, possibly later, from our accountability ad hoc group. Then with receiving input from the full work group and the members of the public, we'll start thinking about draft recommendations and start moving towards final recommendations. And last thing I'll say is that as we start to get more concrete in our thinking about where we're headed, that's when we're really going to want to make sure we have listening sessions, that we're hearing from the community. And so all of us, as we talked about many times, bring with us constituencies. So think about how you as a member of this work group can engage your community and have ideas for listening sessions or for getting feedback. And members of the public who are very engaged in this, who might have ideas about listening sessions or ways we can reach people we need to reach, we're certainly open to that. So in these next couple of months, we're going to transition into start talking about concept recommendations and then draft recommendations, and then moving towards our final goal of making recommendations. With that, I think we'll conclude. Hopefully, if it's safe, hopefully we'll be able to be in person next month. We'll see. And thank you all, and thank you to the panelists again, and have a good evening.